Hello everybody, I'm Miss Jessica from EVPL McCullough, and today we're continuing our chapter book story time where we are previewing just a little bit of a story so that you can discover what you would like to read next by seeing what we have to offer. We have such a large collection, and I know it is really hard trying to decide what to read next. So this has given me a great opportunity to discover new books that I may not have picked up initially. And then if you would like to continue to the story, we have lots of ways to do that. When we were together last time, we spun our wheel and landed on mystery. And I have to say that mystery stories are some of my favorites. I love a good mystery. I love trying to solve things by putting clues together and seeing what puzzles I can also discover the answer to. So this is one of my favorite genres. Very quickly before I introduce our book, I do have a cough drop, so if you notice that, it's because my allergies are terrible at this time of year. And also, Wrigley is walking around down here, and she very rarely makes an appearance on camera, so I'm hoping we can get her over here to visit us here in just a bit. Okay, so our book that we are going to be reading today is a New York Public Library book, The Story Collector, and this is by Kristin O'Donnell Tubb. And this is a very interesting book because the New York Public Library is fascinating and that it has apartments inside of it that people actually lived in. So the people that took care of the buildings when it was closed, so whether that was for maintenance or security, they actually lived in the library. And to me, that sounds like a dream, to be able to explore all by yourself and see what's going on when no one else is in the building. And just to live in a library, that would be amazing. So there is a mystery that goes along with this book, so I'm interested to see what's going to happen. Okay, so let's read the inside cover. And it says, inspired by a true story of a girl who lived in the library. 11-year-old Viviani Fedler grew up surrounded by books, but now she's ready for her own story to begin. As the daughter of the library superintendent, Viviani has explored every nook, cranny, and room except the ones her father keeps locked. When Viviani suspects that the library is haunted, she decides to spook new girl Merritt Mubarak with a harmless little prank. But what begins as a joke quickly gets out of hand. Soon, Viviani, Merritt, and their friends have to solve two big mysteries. Is there really a ghost in the library? And did it steal the expensive stamp collection? Ooh, so that sounds interesting. Okay, so just a quick information about this book. We have print copies available. We also have it as an e-audiobook, so if listening to a story is something you'd like to continue doing, you can do that. And also, there is a sequel to this book. So this one came out in 2018, and 2020, last year, they actually published a sequel to this. So I always love it when a story continues. That's one of my favorite things. So let's see what's going on. All right, so The Story Collector. I really like that name too. Like, what types of stories is she collecting? Is she collecting her own? Are they stories in the library? Does it have to do with the books in the library? So there's a lot of things that I have questions about and I'm excited to get to. All right, so here we go. Chapter 1, Baseball. Dewey Decimal 796.357. See also Sports World Series. Some people are story collectors, while others collect seashells or stuffed animals or stamps. Story collectors wrap themselves in words, surround themselves with sentences, and play with participles, even those pesky, perky, dangling ones. They climb over C's and mount M's and lounge in L's. Soon enough, they land in the land of homonyms, and then wham! They stumble into onomatopoeia, that lovely, creaking, booming bit of wordplay, and that, dear friend, is where our story begins. Crack! The bat swung over Viviani Fetterler's left shoulder, then clattered to the terracotta tile floor of the New York Public Library. She shrieked and ran, red hair flying, nothing short of a firework whizzing around the bases. First, she shouted as her foot landed squarely on the pages of The Lost Princess of Oz. Viviani's older brother, John Jr., muttered something unsavory as the ball sailed over his head. John's best pal, Carol Case, scrambled across the floor, slipping and sliding around the massive carved oak tables until he finally spotted the ball. It was rolling neatly down the aisle between stacks of Modern Priscilla magazine and Whisper. As the children of the building superintendent, the Fetterlers had played baseball in many rooms of the library, but the periodical reading room was their favorite. It was a perfect square, and if you squinted, the red tile floor looked just like the clay in a baseball diamond. "Second!" Viviani yelled as she towed the Bobbsey twins on Blueberry Island. Outside these thick marble walls, a horse and buggy trotted alongside, clanking trolleys and honking automobiles over rumbling subways. And on a clear day, if you leaned just right, you could see the gleaming white spire of the Woolworth Building, the tallest building in the world from this spot at 5th and 42nd. All right, and they have a really great illustration here for us of them playing baseball. And I just want to point out their clothes. So you can see that this is definitely set in an older time period just based on what they're what they're wearing, even what they're reading, some of the titles that we're hearing. And I think our biggest clue was the horse and buggy going along the trolleys. So definitely an older time period. The room had ample light from multiple windows, and Viviani imagined the trees fluttering in the wind just outside as the stadium full of fans cheering her on. "Go, Viv, you can do it!" She could hear them screaming now. "Head for home, Viviani! Head for home!" She could make it. She knew she could make it. She rounded third, a copy of Once on a Time, and plowed toward home plate. Carol scooped up the ball and hurled it with a grunt. The ball whizzed past Viviani and flew directly at one of the two-story lead glass windows. A window with frilly woodwork around the sides and thick iron grills holding the glass in place. An expensive window. One that wouldn't fare well on the wrong end of a speeding baseball. At the last moment, John Jr. leapt into the air and thunk! The ball nestled into his leather glove. John Jr. touched the base at the exact moment Viviani shouted, "Home!" She slammed into him, and the two toppled over the copy of The House at Pooh Corner that served as home plate. "Out!" declared John. "Am not," said Viviani. "R2." "Am not. "Stop arguing," Carol said, "but you are out, Red." Viviani stuck out her tongue at Carol and whirled to her teammate and best friend. "Tell them, Eva, tell them I'm in." Eva twirled a lock of her dark hair about her finger, straightening and releasing a perfect pin curl. "She's in. I'm pretty sure she's in." Viviani and John Jr. turned to the umpire. "Ump," said John. But it was readily apparent that this umpire would be of no use, at least not where baseball was concerned. The middle Fetterler child, Edward, sat reading on an overturned garbage can, the ones with the brass lion knockers was specifically made for the library. His nose was buried deep in first base. "Fact," Edward said into the book, which he'd lifted off the baseball diamond as soon as Viviani had towed it. "The national anthem in Oz is the Oz-Spangled Banner." "Edward!" Vivian Jr. shouted. "Out," Edward declared without even bothering to look up. Viviani cleared her throat and prepared to deliver her protest. She'd start with an appeal to Edward's finer points, his studiousness, his quiet strength. Then she'd appeal to his vast logical side. She'd explain how it was impossible for John Jr. to have leapt that high, only to have landed just at the right time, in just the right place to tag her at home plate. Finally, she'd nail her argument with this. John Jr. must have instead tagged a library goblin, not her. Their father often told stories of the goblins, helpful little creatures that crept around the library steps at night when all the patrons had gone home. Edward couldn't resist the 1-2 punch of a compliment. plus a mythical creature. Then, if all else failed, she would yell at him. Before Viviani could open her mouth, the children's librarian, Miss Alice Keats O'Connor, entered the room with a patron. "Killjoy," Viviani muttered. Unfortunately, in such a large, high-ceilinged, echoing room, her words were magnified. Viviani cringed. Eva shrank. "It's not what it looks like," Viviani said weakly. The keen eyes of Miss O'Connor flew from the panting children to her precious books scattered about the room. A thunderous frown darkened her brow. Her nostrils flared, her glasses slipped to the tip of her nose, and she crammed them against her eyebrows with a firm finger. Miss O'Connor puffed up like a balloon. "You were playing baseball in the periodical reading room?" "Okay, it's exactly what it looks like," Viviani said. Carol sputtered a laugh and caught an elbow in the ribs from John Jr. "You were playing baseball?" Miss O'Connor repeated. "In the periodical reading room? And oh, you mangled poo!" She lifted home base and examined the book in the sunlight, glinting through the "thank goodness she hadn't seen it nearly get smashed" window. The book had gotten a tad rumpled. A few pages were bent and a large dusty footprint graced the back cover. "Only improves it if you ask me," Carol whispered. "Load of treacle." This was quite the rotten thing to say, as poo held a special place in the hearts of all children's librarians, especially Miss O'Connor's. The librarian considered trampling a book a tantamount to trampling the author, him, or herself. "Out!" She stamped her heel, bam, against the tile floor and jabbed a finger at the door. Carol and John Jr. chuckled and dashed into the hallway. Viviani, who knew Eva's shyness would keep her glued to the spot, grabbed her friend by the wrist and pulled her toward the frosted glass doors. Miss O'Connor was positively red-faced. "Your coloring looks really pretty when you get all flustered like that, Mrs. O'Connor," Viv said, and she and Eva scooted past. "Especially against your pearl earrings," Viv chuckled. "And if you think about it, Miss O'Connor—" "Viviani Joffrey Fetteler," Miss O'Connor said, pushing her glasses up her nose again. "I do not want to hear one of your tales right now." "See, friend, here's the trouble with having a storyteller's soul. Not everyone enjoys a good story all the time. Not even librarians. Because sometimes the adults in them overtake their story-loving side. Too often, people think of stories as fluff or nonsense. Some might even go far as to call them lies." "But," Viv began. Miss O'Connor turned redder still and shook her pointer finger. "Out." Edward never once looked up from The Lost Princess of Oz. "Out. That's exactly what I said." Chapter 2. Games. Dewey Decimal 790.1. See also Indoor Games Activities. When nightfall weaves its way through the New York Public Library, it is nothing shy of magic. Long stretches of sunlight on marble morph from white to yellow to pink to orange to red, then dim slowly completely. Shadows yawn and stretch awake. 85 miles of books on shelves blink away their daytime sleep. For books are often nocturnal creatures, ready to play, to roam, to hunt. Or so it seemed to Viviani, who felt as though those stacks of books had eyes. First, the administrative staff would depart. Viviani would sneak into their offices just across the main hall from the apartment on the second floor where her family lived because her father was the building superintendent. Viviani would wheel about in office chairs and wrap curly-Q telephone cords around herself and bang typewriter keys to the tunes of her favorite songs, such as "In the Morning and the Evening Ain't We Got Fun." Meanwhile, the paper rolled into the typewriter would actually read Next, after the librarians straightened the last of the stacks, gathered their belongings, and shut off lamps, they would leave. This was where the fun would really start. Viviani would pull books off the shelves to make herself a sizable book fort with a nice book thrown inside. "Off with their heads," she'd shout, "and who dares disobey me?" Then she'd stack the books exactly back on the shelves in order because, as her dad was fond of saying, "Hell hath no fury like a librarian scorned." Next, from downstairs came the unmistakable boom that signaled the large, ornate iron doors being pulled shut over the main library entrance. The library, which roared like a lion with the sound of 11,000 visitors passing through its wooden rotating doors each day, fell to a purr and then finally to sleep. Once those main doors were closed and locked, the heartbeat of the library quieted and the building belonged to Viviani and her family. This particular late fall evening, Viviani poked her head over the thick marble railing. 2 stories below in the lobby, the night guard, jolly old Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐦𝐦𝐞𝐫, jangled his large brass key ring, went to the back of the main entrance hall, and took a left toward the theater while whistling, "Yes, sir, that's my baby." "I bested you again, sir," Viviani whispered with a smile, then tiptoed down the wide, dark hallway, across the length of the building, and down one flight of stairs. Her destination was the map room at the far end of the first floor. But just as Viv was sneaking down the last set of stairs and around the corner, she heard footsteps. "Ha! Caught you, Red!" Viviani's heart skipped a beat. She was face to face, or rather, face to finger, with Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝑀 Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝑚 said, pulling a small notebook and pen from his breast pocket. "That leaves you with 285, Viviani said, and Mr. 𝐒𝐮𝐬𝐴𝐻𝑒𝐿𝑒𝐻𝑒𝑚 said in unison. Viviani couldn't help but grin. She stood on tiptoe, trying to see the tally marks stretched in Mr. 𝐒𝐮's notepad. "I'm still in the lead, though, right?" Mr. 𝐒𝐮 glanced at the point totals. "No, ma'am, it's been 16 days since I've seen Edward. He's the one to beat." Viviani nodded, cracked her knuckles. "Edward," she whispered. "Should have known." She paused, then added, "Hey, I really like the turkey bow tie. Perfect for Thanksgiving. Gobble, gobble." Mr. 𝐒𝐮 wore a different bow tie every day, and combined with his shapely creased security guard jacket, he was always quite a spiffy sight. "Flattery will get you nowhere, Viviani," he said, chuckling. 285. Viviani's lips pursed. "Have you lost weight?" Mr. 𝐒𝐮 laughed, snapped the notebook shut, tucked it back into his pocket, and patted it. "Carry on then, Red." Mr. 𝐒𝐮 walked away, whistling and jangling his key ring. And so the ongoing game of Master Thief continued. Viviani and her brothers could on most nights maneuver throughout the library without once seeing Mr. 𝐒𝐮. Not that they didn't care for him. He gave hearty hugs and was quick to share a stick of gum, but each day they managed to avoid him, he awarded them 10 points from their Master Thief status. A gotcha greeting from Mr. 𝐒𝐮 after the library coast set the Federer kids back 5 points. Viviani entered the moonlight-soaked map room. She adored this room. The walls were painted a soft sky blue, the ceiling covered in ornate gold carvings, but best of all were the maps. They were everywhere. On the walls, on the shelves, sprawled open in large atlases across gleaming tabletops. Viviani felt as if she had the whole world at her fingertips when she was in the map room. She crossed to the 16th century map displayed on the opposite side of the room. It depicted the English Channel and its whereabouts. And the best part, it was covered in sea monsters. The maps always brought to mind Viviani's favorite pirate tale about Lady Mary Killigrew, who dressed like a man and sailed under the name Pirate John Bonny. She wished she could be an adventurer like her. Viviani bet that when Lady Mary sailed, the Kraken and the sea dragons fled to deep waters because they knew better than to be beheaded by her swift sword. Oh, how Viviani loved all those stinky old pirates, and oh, how she loved the maps that captured those tales. Viv sank into a chair and sighed. There were so many exciting stories to collect, tales of bravery, tidbits of tenacity, fables filled with daring do. Her life was so boring in comparison. How was she supposed to find her happily ever after if she wasn't even sure her once upon a time had started yet? Viv tugged the fur collar of her overcoat to her cheeks and huffed a cloud of warm breath on her balled fists. Viv and her family often wore coats on chilly evenings in the massive library. While the furnace chugged throughout the night, thanks to Papa stoking it regularly, the amount of coal used in the evening was significantly less. She hugged her knees and rocked on the creaky wooden chair. Viv could go back to their warm library apartment, but she was avoiding home. Her mother, Cornelia Federler, would insist she help with cooking dinner. Cooking? Her mother was a real prize at it, and even here, 2 city blocks north and 1 floor down, Vivian could smell the heavenly mix of onions and garlic and peppers wafting from their apartment. She pictured the scent as a snake winding its way through the library until it found her here in this dark room, tempting her in every way Eve was tempted with the apple. "Viviani," it hissed. But cooking? Where was the danger and excitement in that? One couldn't even gather so much as a skinned knee from cooking. No, she'd simply head back when her mother sounded the dinner gong, chosen and purchased in Chinatown when a bell couldn't be heard throughout the massive building. Viviani sat enjoying the quiet and the world on maps all about, until suddenly she felt eyes on her. A shadow passed across the walls. A rustle made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She turned her chair, groaning. "Mr. Green." Viviani gulped. Well, everyone knew Mr. Eames's routine. Mr. Green, the library custodian, kept them guessing. No one ever heard him coming. Mr. Green snuck around the big table at the opposite end of the room. He held a paper trash bag and scooped the leftover scraps of notes and discarded pencil shavings and bent pen nubs into his bag. Scoop, shuffle, drag. "Don't be silly," Viviani told herself as she studied Mr. Green's every move. "He's fine. Don't believe what John Jr. says about him." Mr. Green's gums smacked. Viviani shivered. Just a coincidence, she thought. There's nothing to be afraid of. Mr. Green worked his jaw back and forth. Viviani's stomach dropped. That could be anything. Mr. Green blew a slow pink bubble with gum in his mouth and pop! Mr. Green is not a cannibal. Unfortunately, yes, Viviani did say that aloud. Mr. Green jumped, spilling the contents of the bag he was holding. Refuse went everywhere, a poof of dust and dirt and trash. Mr. Green's brow furrowed. He fixed his glare on Viviani. Did he just growl? Viviani was sure he growled. She yelped, leapt up, dashed across the room, through the double leather doors, and up 1 flight of stairs, slipping and sliding all the way down the hall to the door of her family's apartment. She paused there to catch her breath because her mother could smell mischief a mile away. John Jr. had once told her that Mr. Green was a cannibal. His words rang through her head now. That Mr. Green? Oh, you may think he's a custodian, but he would just as soon plop you into that bag of his. Red, beware. Viviani had laughed at the time. Mr. Green, he's no cannibal. Junior had narrowed his twinkling eyes at her. And his custodial closet, the one at the bottom of the basement stairs, the one that's always locked? What about it? Viviani asked, her voice suddenly shaking. He's the only one with the keys to that closet. No one else has a key like that. Yeah, so? That's where he hides the evidence. That's where he takes the bones of his victims, Red. That closet of his is a graveyard. John Jr. had cackled wildly, licking his fingertips as if he just enjoyed a tasty meal. It's not true, Viv had said, shaking to the tips of her toenails. Still, it could be true, couldn't it? John Jr. had asked her. That was a favorite saying of their papa's. It could be true, and could danced around in Vivian's mind as solidly as probably, which was nearly definitely. Just watch where you wander, Red, or else plop! John Jr. had jumped and stamped his foot then, and Viviani and Edward had yelped. Viviani was not thick. She knew John Jr. was just teasing her. It was what older brothers did, after all. But once John Jr. said it could be true, things became all too real for Viviani Joffrey Federler. Vivia's teeth squeaked, and she ground them so hard she gulped a second time. She pushed off the wall and opened the door to head inside the apartment. Better to help with cooking than to end up inside a cooking pot. All right, so we're going to stop there at the end of chapter 2. So we are leaving off with chapter 3 about to begin. And already I'm really fascinated by this life. getting to play games in different rooms of a library, I can only imagine what you could play, like hide and seek or tag, even though you're not supposed to run in a library, but baseball, that kind of sounds fun. So what an interesting life. And the fact that we haven't even gotten to the mysterious part of this yet, where we want to know, is the library haunted? A stamp collection goes missing, so what has happened to that? So this sounds like a really interesting book. And like I said, if you're interested in continuing it, we have print copies or we have an e-audiobook, but you can always go to our website to either check a copy out, put one on hold, or to give us a call or stop by and we can help you find one. All right, so let's find out what we're going to be reading next time. All right, so we have just been reading a mystery book, so we're going to be spinning our wheel to find out what we're going to read next time. And I do keep a list of what we have been reading so we can get a variety. So if I do happen to land on something that we have seen recently, I will spin it again just so we can get some variety. Okay, so we were just reading about mystery. We have realistic fiction, adventure, science fiction, historical fiction, humor, fantasy, spooky, and then back to mystery. All right, so let's see what we get. Ooh, fantasy. That's an interesting one, and we have not had that one in a while. All right, so next time we're together, we will be reading a fantasy story. So thank you for joining us. Don't forget, if you go to evpl.org, you can see all of our amazing resources, whether that is our collection that you can check out or look for your next favorite book. You can also see what events are coming up, whether they are in person or virtual. And we are open, so you can always stop in and see us, and we would love to visit with you and help you find something that you would love to enjoy next. And as always, social media, like and subscribe to all of them, and you will always be notified when we have something new and exciting. Thank you for joining me. I will see you next Friday. Bye.